All right. So blessed be the witches. I hope that y'all can hear me okay. I am streaming from my living room. Okay. Um, blessed be the witches. I have a lovely guest on for tonight. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, way out in the world wide web of witches. My name is Nathan King. I'm an author. I also consider myself an occultist. I'm a Minos within the Minoan Brotherhood, and I'm also a high priest within folkloric Dreadcraft. So, yeah, wonderful, exciting things. I also was on here, and you might recognize me from the channel from talking about the book that came out. So, I'm so glad to be back.
Yeah.
So I know.
You messaged me about
And this was such a hey, I think we should talk about something and let's just do this. And it's also my birthday today.
happy
So
birthday.
thank you. And I'm basking in the solar return energies and yeah, definitely just feeling the quickening of this full moon and moving forward that drive pull towards spring. I'm very inspired and re-inspired, but also I'm looking at like all of those things that we do this time of year and I'm like, oh wow, there's a lot of relationships and a lot of spiritual relationships like specifically that are being maintained and are being upkept right now, and there's a lot of focus I think for a lot of people within those relationships, which got me to thinking about, well, spells. Yeah, we use spells and spell work, and a lot of people, especially like it's talked about early on, will come to the craft looking for all of that magic and stuff. And the nice thing about, I think, our systems is you get all of that magic, but also it is very much like through the relationships and through that knowing and that exchange you've had with the spirit world that you kind of get what you need. You also are kind of led to where you're supposed to go. So spellworking is a tool that drives us closer to that relationship, but also unionizes all of those things. So it's not all about the spells, but spells are certainly a tool. And that's always been my perspective.
Yeah.
Spells
Yeah.
are so varied too. And so when we look at like the techniques and all the varied ways that we may do this, I mean, so much of my spell work and how I look at this is verbal stuff, and a lot of that is simply just opening up communication with my familiars and with spirits and creating very tactile rituals or systems of things where I'm actively doing something that open that channel of communication up for that very specific need. I work a lot with the idea of like touchstones. So I have very particular items and very particular spirits for very particular things. And I think it's based off of even more than just, oh, we think that this thing has power and this thing is going to send its power and achieve it. But it's also like, I have imbued it with power. There's an I in to that as well. Which is why witches are always talking about will, right? And it's important to have willpower because you make the first move. And spellcraft very much can only take place if you take that first move. You can't really, I like the quote, you can't fake a spell because you can't.
Yeah.
What were spells that you saw, or spells that I mean, even in pop culture, but like, do you remember being like, huh, I want to try that, or I could do that? And what results did you find?
I mean, speaking to like pop culture, okay, the familiar summoning in Sabrina,
Yeah,
that was kind of giving. Like, that was giving, honestly, like some silver bullet tea.
absolutely. No, and like, and it's so like, I love these different worlds that they set up in Sabrina of like explaining how their magic works and like where their magic is being drawn from, which is again shows that this is like, because they have a pact or because they have an oath with Satan, there's an exchange of magical power. Now, in the series, when there's a shift of hands in deities who these witches are drawing their power from, they still have power, but it carries over and it then goes into the Hecate figure that they then are summoning, which for me was a ritual that really made me go, oh my God, I've seen this, I've done this. This is something that
Yeah. I
spoke to
loved
a lot
that
of
ritual when she was like, I'll pray to you morning, noon, and
right.
night. I was like, bitch.
And just the whole image of like all the things that go into that. Because I always like to say, there's a line from I forget what film it's from, but the line is, do you pray? And the character responds with, oh no, I communicate. And I always say that's perfect for what witches do. We don't necessarily pray, but we communicate, and it's that direct.
I feel like for those of you that are new here, I should do it this way, I guess. For those of you that are new here, why don't you talk about how you got into traditional witchcraft? Let's like maybe start there.
Yeah.
So, traditional witchcraft, what is it to you, and how did you get into the shilling a gig of it all?
Right. So traditional witchcraft for me, I think it is a very loose network of practitioners and systems that are drawing from not just like historical accounts, but are drawing from a specific form of occultism that predates a lot of modern movements, but also synthesizes with them. We're talking a lot about animistic ideas and philosophies. We're talking about things that are uh, not just pagan, but also are very like early Christian things that in dual faith practices would make sense if we're talking about historical witchcraft. And so, what a lot of people in traditional witchcraft do and what they seek to do is to carry on that story and that said tradition and those spirits. So it's not just a tradition of inspiration, but it's also a tradition of relationships with those same spirits, with those same gods, and with those same lands, that physical terrain that you stand on, that is talked about in historical accounts, talked about in ancestral lore, and what you feel embodied and spiritually invigorated by. To put it very eloquently and not so succinctly, how would you define it? What's your
I
sort
mean,
of
I
what's
don't know
your
if I can follow that. I would say traditional witchcraft, as I've been initiated, is ATW, right? Through my tradition. It's American folkloric traditional witchcraft, which definitely is inspired by our British cousins. I would say that ATW is even like the redheaded stepchild of traditional craft. Um, I would say that traditional witchcraft is based off of folkloric, like trial records, um, as well as some pagan inspirations. But I have spicy feelings
yeah,
about pagans and
right.
trad witches because I don't actually think that we have that much in common.
This is an interesting thing, and I'm so glad you bring this up because I was in a discussion literally a week ago with somebody, and they were asking me, would I describe myself as pagan? Because I've always described myself as pagan, and now in the past probably couple of years, I haven't really been advertising that or putting that out there. It's just not something I'm like, because labels are labels, right? But like when I look at my practice and I look at what being a pagan historically meant, my practice is not pre-Christian, far from it. It comes, specifically from the wellspring movement of witchcraft and occultism that came out of the 1930s in England. So like, that's not pre-Christian. And yeah, it gets thrown around like, what do you mean by that? That becomes a very interesting
Right.
question. And so, yeah, for me, I'm moving further away from the pagan as a term.
No, I am too, because I don't think it accurately describes my practice or my values. I think that I fall in the very unpopular camp that to me, witchcraft, sure, can it be a label? Can it be an identifier, sure. Politically, I live for that. Can it be a practice like blacksmithing or hairdressing
Something
or
you can,
weaving?
yeah,
Sure. The
absolutely.
cunning craft, of course. But it can also be a religion. And
Yeah.
that's where it gets kind of spicy and kind of controversial. Because people don't love to hear about the craft as a religion. And I would
Especially,
argue that it
oh,
can
I love it.
be all of them. Like it can be a political identifier, it can be a practice, it can be a religion, it can be all three. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
This is going to get spicy, and I love that this is where the conversation is going, because when people hear the word religion, their mind is immediately going, to the Western Christianized Abrahamic idea of that.
Yes.
And that's not been my experience, because I think certainly most of the trad witches I hang out with and talk to would consider not all of their practice, but definitely a good portion of it as something that has a religiosity to it, that has a devotion to it, because they do consider themselves priests and priestesses and priestesses, and being a priest of something has that connotation, and it has that level of service behind it. And then you have to define, well, in service to who and in service to what? What does that mean? But ultimately, people are going to get into witchcraft at different levels, or looking for different levels of devotion. And I think for traditional witchcraft, it's viewed, because of that initiatory element, as something that is almost something that's passed to you, as a spirit would pass you a special language or a special chain of command that takes you to the universal power. So it is a priesthood, and it seeks to be in service of the group, but also what that group is in service to, which are the gods, which are the spirits, which are the witch's famous role as being a guardian and protector of these liminal spaces.
But what gods would you say are over the craft?
I would definitely say there's a witch mother, there's a goddess of witches. I associate her with Aradia, because that's just who I am. And that's, you understand, you speak that language. But for people who don't or may not understand why Aradia is as awesome as she is, it's looking at the figure of a moon goddess and seeing how, like, even though this is not something that's 100% historically accurate, culture and aesthetics and magical philosophies change over time. And so the magical tradition as we know it has given us this figure of a moon goddess who is a witch's goddess. And I think that's a really powerful spirit to tap into, because that's also something that takes charge over not just being within a mystery school, but also within witchcraft, a folk craft, something where you get familiars and a transformative experience. I also think, really, that the other god and the main god is the devil. And because when you look at a lot of witchcraft, even before the revival, it's accounts of the devil. It's accounts of meeting the man in black, or sometimes a man in all white. But there's always a dichotomy of a earl or a presidential figure in power who's able to, in exchange, give you something. And oftentimes that figure is very misunderstood, rightfully so, because the god of the witches represents paradox and dichotomy, and all of those things found in the woodlands where men do not go, but the witch must tread, because that is where the oath is made. To me, those are the ultimate supreme sort of things. And I don't think that all gods are one god. I'm not saying that. But what I do think is that there are specific archetypes or specific roles that certain gods that are all around us, right on, this land. I'm in Michigan, so my Michigan gods are a little different. but they respond to the same role that these archetypes give us, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I would agree. But I feel like there is this divide amongst the eclectic solitary witches and the more traditional brand of craft. And I think some of this comes from like the Scott Cunningham era, which I have some of his books, and I'm not here to speak ill of the dead. But I do think that Scott Cunningham and Silver Raven Wolf painted a very specific picture that changes the way that witchcraft is viewed today. Because when I talk to other witches as a American traditional folkloric variety, they get really turned off by the conversations around Covenry and hierarchy and the degree systems and initiation. And in my opinion, that's very much part of our story.
Very much. Oh, yes.
There's no getting rid of that. Now, I'm not here to say that you can't be a solitary witch. Blessed be and so mote it be. I'm not here to say that you can't be an eclectic witch, but I would ask you, what is that? What is being eclectic witch outside of cultural appropriation? Come on now. No, let's be for real.
And the thing is that when that is something that is used, these are the questions that do have to be asked, and not as an attack thing, but as a help me understand where you're at things, so I know what verbiage or what points to use that I know will make sense to understand. So we're on equal footing. Because for me, the real benefit of going into an initiatory path is there's people who've done it before you. So obviously it has something of substance to it. And because a lot of times there are things like hierarchy and long waiting periods and like intensive training, those things are there for a reason, because this system has substance to it. And so if people are looking for substance, I think it requires those benchmarks and those safety measures of having hierarchy, of having wait periods where you can have the time you need to process the information, because that's what makes it a valuable system. And when that system is changed, it no longer it's no longer a tradition. So for people who are traditional, and I hate to say this, but like we do seek to preserve tradition. So in some way, on that religious aspect, we tend to be conservative in some of the views we have in witchcraft, in terms of what it means to have a traditional outlook, right? How we define the witch versus how somebody who may be picking up a Scott Cunningham book would then define what it means to be a witch. I think it's all interesting stuff, but I think it shows a level of, again, people's interest and how devoted to this thing are you wanting to be or willing to be.
Yeah, and I would say that to me, like I live, breathe, eat shit witchcraft. Okay? Like I wear many other hats. I am a caretaker to someone who is on Medicaid, right? I am a barber. I've been a bartender. I've been an adult content creator. I've worn many hats. But to me, being a witch is both my trade as it is like a verb. It's what I do, and it's a noun. It's who I am. And I can't talk a lot about this in detail, but I told you before we were going live that I was meeting with a film producer. And the film producer today was like, yeah, you're the 35th witch I've talked to. And all of them are eclectic witches, is what he said. And I was talking to him about initiatory witchcraft and covenry and degrees and initiation. And he's like, yeah, no, I've not heard of any of this before. And I'm like, probably not, because again, it's initiatory and it's degree based. So,
which by and large implies this is a secret. And so this is the thing about Tradcraft.
It's the mystery cult.
It's the mystery cult. And so when we're talking about things that are inevitably practiced in secret, everything that's commented about what traditional witches do, unless it's coming from the perspective of a traditional witch, it doesn't really mean jack shittily. But even if that initiate witch is talking about it, we're not going to tell you the whole kit and caboodle of what's going on, because again, there are very specific oaths that we have to hold. And so it's not us being gatekeeping, but what it is more or less us trying to preserve the experience so we don't ruin that experience for somebody else, but also because we value that experience so much so it's not for everyone. In the same way that my very extreme things, they're just it's just not for me. But it comes down to some really, I think, intense perspectives. But because we have these intense perspectives, is just a reflection of, I think, the intensity of the experiences. And when you have a tradition and when you have something that's in an initiatory context, it allows, on a metaphysical level, what I think is morphic resonance, something that is a very clear channel of how this has been done on a repeated timeline. So it's just a very easy way for the spirit to move in through that way. It's a reliable system. It's been repeated through time and time again. It's built up all of that energy. So boom, there it is. Versus a system that's very new and is being cobbled together and experimented with to figure out what works. Traditions have already established what works. So there is none of that feeling you might get if you're stuck in your path. And I do feel like for everybody, people are going through initiations plural all of the time. But when we're talking about initiation with a capital I, that is a very, very specific experience because of what you're exposed to, body and soul, and that's life-changing. And I think it's not us gatekeeping. It's just such a life-changing experience that there are no other words to put to it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And just to kind of touch on too, like when I was talking to this producer, he's talking to mostly eclectic witches. Well, what really is that?
I don't know.
What is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's probably a circle being cast, because when I think of it, I think of like going to a pagan pride event. And how at these pagan pride events, the community will get together, right? And there's this very interesting ritual that takes place. So a circle is cast usually.
Which comes from where? Where do we cast a circle?
Well,
Who does that come from?
It comes originally from Solomonic magic, but
which is weird because like eclectic pagans and eclectic witches want nothing to do with
we don't
those fathers.
We don't really cast circles, do we? It's like it's a different dichotomy too of how we cast circle. It's not what it is in that context. So it's like, okay. And then there's a calling in of, and it depends, it's going to change depending what state you're in. I've heard elements, I've heard spirit animals, I have heard archangels, I have heard a plethora of beings, usually in a set of 4 that are called at the 4 quarters, that have not a whole lot to do with the idea of where the 4 quarters or where the idea of the watchers come from. So you have another sort of a system that has joined another system.
The point is, eclectic paganism and eclectic witchcraft is not what I'm representing.
Yeah.
on my channel, and I don't think it's what you're representing in your brand
No.
either.
No, and one of the things that I do to set this apart, especially when I'm talking about like being an initiate of the Wicca with one C, all right, is like there are two different Wiccas that people are throwing about there, because if you talk to people who are initiates in Gardnerian, Alexandrian traditions, oftentimes they're not describing themselves as Wiccans. That's, and even the term Wicca is something that comes about a lot later. If you look at the writings of Gerald Gardner only uses the word Wicca twice in all of his writings, and over emphasizes again and again, is calling what their practice is the witch cult, This is a part of the witch cult, which is coming off of the ideas of Margaret Murray. But also, when you look at all these other members that are outside of Gardner's system, that are also founding their own aesthetics and philosophies on magical practice. So I'm thinking of people like Charles and Mary Cardell in the Coven of Atho. I'm thinking of Robert Cochrane and the clan of Tubal Cain. I'm thinking of Lois Bourne, who later initiates into the White Goose Feather Coven in Norfolk. These are all different systems that are all sporadically taking place from the 1930s to 1950s, and none of them are calling themselves a practice of Wicca or Wiccans. They're all members of the witch cult. And by and large, none of them are making a distinction among themselves either, because they're all practicing witchcraft. They're all practicing these varied forms, but it's not until...
Well, I kind of feel like, Gerald Gardner and Robert Cochrane, right?
And this is where the split is made.
Yeah, are very beloved fathers of modern witchcraft. They were both BTW until Gerald's kind of decided, I don't want to be the same kind of BTW that Robert Cochrane's in, so let's be Wicca.
Let's be of the Wicca, right? And because one is getting a lot more media interviews and a lot more media attention, which is also getting him in trouble with his initiating coven, because one of the other things to keep in mind, folks, is by and large, Gardnerian witchcraft is a type of old craft, or a type of traditional witchcraft. But because of Gardner, it takes on other life, if you will, because of the cultural whirlpool of occultism that was going on. But it is considered a traditional form of witchcraft, so I don't make much distinction between them other than philosophical interpretations and maybe an aesthetic here and there, because I really do feel these speak to the same currents.
I mean, yeah, I would say that Gerald Gardner was also an initiate of Crowley's line.
Yes, he was
very... I don't think Robert Cochrane was.
Nope.
So I do think that there's a distinction between the Thelemite sort of current that runs through Wicca that does not run through Tradcraft. I don't think that we have Thelema as much.
No, I would agree. And other things too, because Gardner is coming out of a time of when occultists were by and large also thinking about the ideas that came out of theosophy. So things like reincarnation
which theosophy, don't love that.
Not great, right? It's got some
not really great, kind of borderline
racist.
Yeah,
it's racist. It's very, there's some parts in the early writings of Blavatsky that are really...
The Secret Doctrine, where she's talking about the root races. I want nothing to do with that. And honestly, I would like that out of my trad craft.
Right.
Because it's sick, and I don't want no part of it.
What it does out of the whirlpool of how people are basing their ideas off of is it furthers this idea of the colonizer mindset, where people are just taking from all these different things because it's all part of the universal brotherhood, right? And so when you're somebody who's coming out of this idea of synchronism, and synchronism being way okay, and you're also a Freemason, and you're also a Rosicrucian, and you're also, your 9th degree in OTO, and you're also, all of these things are going to feed and influence your next system that you encounter. And I think this is something inevitably is something that does happen. And it turns it into its own separate thing. But they're distinct, but I do think that they're speaking to similar things because they're coming out of that same thing. But one of the best sort of like ideas and books that I think illustrates how this is a whirlpool of ideas of all these people coming out of these different influences and how nothing is really separate or distinct for a long time, is a recent book that came out by Christina Oakling Harrington called Dreams of Witches. It's available through Treadwell's, but really interesting book because she's taking the archival sort of ideas out of literature and art and magazines, showing what people were thinking, like what were the hot topics back then. And it really does show like, oh, okay, this is how this sort of thing leads into the other.
So what do you think of Margaret Murray's Witch Cult?
Girl, she tried. She tried. And I think it's unfortunate. I think, honestly, the thing with Margaret Murray is her work in Egyptology far outweighs her work in witchcraft. And because she's well known for her work as an Egyptologist, she's unfortunately really kind of Aunt Janed into her position, with this like idea of a universal cult of witches that went underground. But it gave a framework, and dare say it gave a very recognizable framework, because what she did is she was able to uncover the patterns that she was observing. And so if we want to call it patterns that she's observing, a framework, that then gets reintroduced with the witch cult in Western Europe. And that takes on a life of its own. But it's unfortunate, it's very soon after that her thesis is debunked, and it's debunked widely. But then like the religious inspiration or the artistic inspiration that it had, it was already out there, and there was nothing that academics could do to stop the creative fervor that witch cult in Western Europe had already started and put in motion, which is ironic because this is what happens to a lot of academic texts on magic. Like Fraser's The Golden Bough comes out and he has to keep writing volume after volume because people are using his work as ways to experiment with magic. And he's like, no, I'm writing this trying to disprove Christianity. Stop it. This is, so it's yeah, keeps going in a circle.
Yeah, I mean, I live for the fantasy of the witch cult. We live, we laugh, we love. But I think regardless of it being disputed, we can see that influence, at least I can, in my own tradition. I mean, we have like the RAINN of like no more than 13 in a coven. Where does that come from? That comes from Margaret Murray. Like that's the whole reason why our tradition in ATW has that kind of rule, that your inner and outer court should not have more than 13. That's exactly where it comes from,
Well, in a similar vein, right, we can look at like this idea of why is there a god of death and resurrection and fertility? Like, why is there a god that is all this dichotomy of death and resurrection again and again and again? Well, when you see like the white goddess, or you look at, again, Golden Bough, like the divine king idea is very popular and is sort of considered staple occultism. So of course it's going to influence how people look at what they're doing, because we have a very rosy colored view of the past because we weren't there. So I think we always idealize it in some way, and whether but again, creatively, what it creates, I think, creates a spirit in its own right, even though it's not necessarily 100% historical. But that's the mystery of it, right? Is it something in between?
Yeah.
In between a history and a folklore. And by stepping into your mill and by turning it and by causing that system of magic to start to stir, you're not just looking at stories and doing what those stories are saying, you are becoming the story. And the story then becomes real because you're doing it. So witches are going to always be fantastical because there's a part of us that is working in the other world, right? It's a between thing. So there will always be an aspect of the fairy tale and the elusive stuff that will always recall every life we've ever had.
Yeah. And talking with this producer earlier, right? He's like talking to me about witchcraft as if he's not talking to a whole witch. Like, I'm like, bro, like, not only do we exist, but like, this is a living, breathing tradition. And I understand that you've talked to 35 eclectic witches before you've talked to me. And I'm not here to invalidate any eclectic witches. I know I have plenty of eclectic, solitary witches that watch my channel, and I'm not here to invalidate your practice, baby. Also, I'm not here to validate it either.
That's not my job either, right? Like,
right. Like, you don't need me to validate that shit either. I represent exactly what I represent and nothing more.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, really, I truly feel I'm a priest of my circle. And that's like, and so unless you're in my circles or you're a member of my coven or I adopt you, within my clan family, then it's not,
Exactly. I feel the same way. I am a priestess of our gods. I am a priestess of my direct coven. I am a priestess within our tradition. I am a priestess even amongst the clanad, the different covens that make up our tradition.
Yeah.
But you are not entitled to my time, energy, or attention just because I'm a priestess of the craft. And I think there's a big separation like there. But also just like talking with this producer, it's like, it's very clear that there's a rift, I would say, between eclectic witches and initiatory witches. And there's also a bigger rift between initiatory trad witches and neo-pagans.
Oh, yeah. I would say, and by neo-pagans, like, you're talking about all of it, like eclectic, like, again, I'm going to go back to that pagan pride scene I painted earlier.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, one of the things, too, that I say, and I love community, because I love people, and I love having a good time, and I love meeting people. I am an extrovert in every sense of what it means to be an extrovert. So I love me a festival. But one of the things that I see and sense is, we'll answer it again. One of the things that I forgot what I was saying. Let's answer this, though, because a trad witch for us, traditional witchcraft, is something that is specific to a network and a collection of initiatory traditions of witchcraft that are, one, going to be based in an ecstatic or animist based practice, meaning it is based on the land where you are on and said traditions or folklore of that land. Two, it's going to have a spiritual set system. So you will be working with that said tradition specific gods.
My delivery is coming, so I'm going to put you on the screen like main way, and I'll be right back. Not to like interrupt or throw you off with our ADHD brain.
No, you're good.
But I'll be right back.
Yeah. But the other thing that's specific with the movement of traditional initiatory witchcraft and the term initiation is initiation is a coven craft thing. A lot of traditional witches are of the viewpoint that you can't self-initiate because there's no one there other than you and the gods to sort of witness that initiation. So an initiation, by and large, has to be witnessed by other people of said tradition to then be like, yes, this person was initiated, what's called a vouch. But truly, the point is, nobody can really initiate without the gods. So the important thing is that you have a connection with the spirit or whatever. But the point of entering traditional witchcraft is you're not just entering that relationship with spirit, you're entering that relationship with a group of people and with a group of people before you. That's cool. You're self-initiating the Man in Black. Again, everyone's going to have different verbiage, but self-initiation is a different sort of thing, because again, initiation is something that's witnessed by other people, and initiation is a very specific rite that has a lot of historic precedence that belongs to a lot of what we would call closed practices, because traditional witchcraft by and large is a network of closed initiatory practices. You can be dedicated to certain spirits, you can be dedicated to certain crafts, but initiation is referring to a very specific rite of passage that a tradition facilitates for you. I hope, but again, this comes down to labels and comes down to language. But late to the party, I'm so glad. COD discussion, fabulous. It's been a really interesting discussion. I mean, the thing with labels, the thing with verbiage is I think they will change every 10 or 15 years, and everybody is going to have these sort of labels and terms up for debate. The important thing is that people are actually getting up and doing the work and having these spiritual interactions and knowing and having the security that they've had a really transformative experience. Nobody has to validate that other than yourself, because if it is such a powerful experience, it doesn't need validating. So that's the biggest takeaway from there. But, I'm of the opinion personally, because of verbiage and because of language being super, super important, when you look at what these terms like dedication and initiation imply, they imply very specific things, and they also have a very specific history behind them. And when that's changed to the comfort of someone's situation, that doesn't mean that changes what that word and that history of that word means. So people can self-initiate all they want. That doesn't mean that the traditions that hold the historic meaning of what that means are going to agree, because they're also the ones holding the tradition itself. And this is the thing, like there will always be people who are on the inside and outside, but the important thing is that you're having that contact with spirit world. And dedication is a very important rite, and that's what starts you on that journey to be able to have lots and lots of spiritual contacts. But again, initiation is into a specific group, a tradition, something that has been before you in a framework that is, again, specific. So, and this is coming too from the influence of the mystery schools. Like, this is not a modern day thing. This is something that goes back to ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and ancient Rome. To be an initiate of the mystery schools was something that you would have to go through the mystery schools in order to claim the title of initiate. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But I hope that it gives a sense of the flavoring and why the flavoring of tradition has the flavors that it does, and that it's not coming from a place of me versus you, but a place of this thing is so sacred and so special. And because it's so sacred and so special, I want to make sure it stays sacred and special as the role as a guardian of it, because of what I've experienced. And because I value so much what I've experienced, I think it's important to be very specific about these sort of things. So that way people know what they're getting themselves in for. Because let's be real, witchcraft and magic are not safe, and they're not meant to be safe. This is about people who walk between the worlds, ride the liminal, and, in the Gospel of Roddy, you shall work until the last of your oppressors are dead. So mote it fucking be. And in politically trying times, witchcraft will always be present as a form of activism. So there's a real, I think, interest and resurgence in people looking at going into initiatory witchcraft, going into traditional witchcraft, because they're looking for those systems that have those histories in place. But also the nice thing about these traditions is it does cut away a lot of the bullshit because it shows you exactly where one thing comes from, and it shows you where the history of that thing's come from, rather than piecing together all these different books because they feel right, or because this is what I'm called to do, but then I'm called to do this later. Like, to me, having consistency builds reliable frameworks. I'm somebody who needs consistency, and so that might be a personality thing as well. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for holding it down. I told Nathan before we started, I had a delivery that was due, and yeah, so I'm back. I just want to say, in terms of erotia, I think in general, and I'm so sorry for like this lighting. In terms of erotia, one of the quotes that I really pull a lot of strength from the charge: whenever a priest shall do ye benediction, bitch, do him injury by double the name.
By double the name.
Double, not rule of three.
No.
Not this rule of three nonsense.
Oh, no.
But by double. And do it in the name of me, your mother, Diana, Queen of Witches all. Bitch. I live for that quote.
I just have this image of like taking out a hat pin, slicing my palm, and like flicking a blood on a priest and just telling him to go off himself, because that's where I'm at. And it's very scary when like there's a literal task force that's being created to eradicate like non-Christians. That's wild to me. So it's just going to get a lot more witchy, and it's going to get a lot more intense from where I stand.
Well, to quote like my upline, Lorelei Black says, "We are living in the new times of King James."
I love that, the new times.
The new times of King James. Because, King James was obsessed with witches.
And obsessed with his self-image.
And we are living in the new King James.
Oh, Lorelei Black is one of the most brilliant witches I know. And this is another reason why. This is a brilliant quote.
Yeah, she's an absolutely amazing woman. She's a phenomenal witch. I am blessed to be able to study under her. And her ex-wife, Natalie Long, who is an amazing witch and a Thelemite as well. Both of them are who I would consider my craft parents in the terms of lines of succession. They would be like my craft parents.
The craft parents. No, I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Because they both really paved the way for making ATW be on the books. Because before that, ATW was ceremonial magic, powwow, and hoodoo in like a mixed bag kind of way.
There wasn't anything specific as far as like looking at witchcraft and witchcraft's placement.
Yeah. Well, if you look up American traditional folkloric witchcraft, you're going to go back to 2009 when these two queer women, which also I find a lot of pride in the fact that my upline is from queer women, not from white British men, which if you go far enough back, of course, they're white British men. But yeah, I find a lot of pride in the fact that my upline is queer and is she, her. Again, if you go far enough back, it'll be British and very white and very male. But how was it while I was gone? How was the chat? I hope they treated you well.
I think they did. I think I got passionate about the things I care about. Things like I'm very passionate that, initiation means a very specific thing because of the history, because of the context, right? And so like I think because of like what initiation by the word implies, it is referring to a specific rite of passage that is witnessed by people. There have to be
I
other.
would say, and this is controversial yet brave, but I would say initiation, controversial yet brave. You can self-dedicate, you cannot self-initiate, because initiation involves like big I, the gods of the craft. Little I, someone else or a group of someone else is dragging you through your initiation. There isn't self-initiation. I think that's I think that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's because it's about the language, and I think the power that resides in language in of itself. Like words mean something. They have a power that's part of why we say spelling and spells. And so yeah, like, but I think dedication is a really great way and a really easy way, and it's accessible way to open the door to get you on a path towards initiation. I think a lot of people who do that, you know, I dedicate myself as a witch, right? That pops up in all of those books in the 90s.
Period.
They found themselves as initiates some way down the line. But again, it speaks to being part of a priesthood, which is a different level of devotion. I've met a lot of witches, a lot of witches who may not consider themselves priesthood or have not gone through like initiation, because one of the nice things about initiation is it says like you are a witch and you are a priest. They're both present there. So yeah, language, man.
Well, and I think, like, in terms of that, we can dedicate. Absolutely. And also, wherever you are, comment down below where you're watching the stream from, wherever you are. You can initiate as well. But there is kind of a separation. When you dedicate, it's more X coming to Y. When you initiate, it's Y coming to Z. These are two totally different experiences. And I do think that there is the big I initiation that other witches can never give you, no matter what our tradition, no matter what our lineage. If the gods call you, they call you, period. You don't need me or Nathan or any other initiate to tell you if the gods call you. But there is a distinct difference between being initiated by the little I, like me and Nathan, with the gods, and doing it on your own. I mean, I know that when I was a teenager, I had to hunt down the Witch's Bible. And I looked at those pictures and I coveted that book because at the time, that was what was out there. And I was like, oh, this is initiatory craft. This is what I'm called to. Which, no tea, no shade, no pink lemonade to Janet Farrar. I have a deep appreciation for her. What I do now is nothing of the sort, but I appreciate what the Farrars put out. There's still a distinction. Like when I have been a part of group initiations as a initiator and as an initiate, completely different from self-initiation.
They are
And
two
I
different
think this
things
is where like the fourth power kind of comes in, because even if I wanted to like break it down for you, baby, you can't break down the mysteries in mortal human words. So you just kind of have to take my word for it that like it's not the same.
And that's why people don't like it, because it's just something that can only be experienced. And that comes down to accessibility. Like, I know that there are a lot of people who have to travel, hours to get to their specific.
People cross state lines and go to different countries for initiation.
Yeah. So, because this is again, this takes work. This is the real dedication. And this is a life-changing, altering pursuit. They are called degrees for a reason. They take work, they take effort, and it's not the kind of work that you sit down with books and paper, even though there's that as well. But it's the soul stuff, man. I mean, the soul is stirred, and your life is put on a path of acceleration.
And not everyone is called to pursue all the degrees. And maybe that would be a cool episode for us to like talk about next time.
I really like the idea of kind of going and talking about our experiences with Coven hierarchies and Coven structures, and like why.
Oh, I would love that.
That's so beneficial, and it's been so beneficial. Yeah.
I published a few videos about like Coven specialties and offices and hierarchy and the way that our Coven and ATW tradition gets down with the get down. And those videos are oddly very popular, considering so much of my audience is solitary and eclectic.
Because people, I think, are looking for that structure. I think ultimately, if there were enough priests and priestesses and priestesses to go around to do these initiations and to expose people to these systems, they would be. But that's also part of their safety mechanism of how we hide in plain sight, and we call to those who are truly called to these systems. Just my take on it, though.
Yeah, no, same. And I also I really lean into the fact that we are a initiatory mystery cult.
There are things that you and I will never be able to put into words, but
you just watched me try earlier where I was like trying to explain the difference between big and little I initiation, and I stumbled over my own words because I can't even explain it.
Yeah, because there's something when you see an actor completely go and something else takes that actor over and your sense of disbelief is completely gone. There's that, but there's also this feeling of the actual other world. Like, things are colder. You're in a cold sweat. The flames are emitting rainbow, frequent like lights, and there's something very eerie about what you are feeling that you can't quite put into words. And then both of these things kind of create another level of experience that takes you deeper. I mean, it's very similar to a trance, but dreaming, it's like dreaming with your eyes open.
I call it witch flight. And
that's exactly what it is.
I wrote 3 books about that now because there's a lot of books out there about astral travel, but they're all very new agey.
Yeah, and they don't speak to...
And I wrote my books from like a trad witch experience, and not to be gross and self-promotional, but like, if we don't do it, no one will. So check out my books on Amazon. Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, Ambrosia's Book of Sorcery, Ambrosia's Book of Spirits, and get into the chill and a gig.
Get into it. Because these are also things that you will keep going back to. Like, yeah, that's the thing.
And I think that Witchflight is like a keystone of what makes traditional witchcraft. Witchflight is a big part of it. I do want to say before we start wrapping up, because we are close to like the hour mark or a little over, if anyone has any questions for me or Nathan or both, leave them down below. We're going to wrap this up here soon. I want to say, Nathan, thank you so much for hitting me up and being like, oh, we should do a Because, I'm always down. I was like,
This
say
is
less.
literally
Come
the
on next week.
best way for me to spend my birthday evening. This is what I love talking about. And yeah,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm officially a quarter of a century. We're 25. Wow.
Iconic.
Iconic, right?
Okay.
Let's see.
Would you like to take this, Nathan?
So, Haiti of familiarity here. For now, are they attracted to strangeness? Strangeness? Because wait up closer and closer. Unknown is kind of hard.
Okay. So
I believe that is asking.
You guys are live. Thank
Being here,
you.
familiar to strangeness. I would cast
Jasper says, how can I find more confidence in a witch, but a trans woman witch at that in the South?
I encourage you to every day do a power reminder. If that means waking up and chanting, in the name of the holy mystery, I call my power back to me. In the name of the holy mystery, I call this crown of sovereignty. In the name of the holy mystery, I call my power back to me.
Come on. Come on.
I think for you, because of your location, well, I'll give you two things with your location. Number one, the living are very hostile, but I think also number two, you've got some really, really great allies and some graveyards to go visit to make some allies of some people who also know what it's like to be marginalized in the South, where you're at, in your hometown. So making offerings by walking through the cemetery, laying pennies at those boundary markers, finding a crossroads where you can call upon the spirit of place for protection, but also reminding of yourself of your power, because that's the biggest thing, is maintaining a clear vision of the impact that you truly hold. Like, you have power, and it's in the moment that you stop or you doubt it or you falter it, that's when other things start to sneak in, and that's ultimately our own battle. But you have that power, so remind yourself of it, and that daily practice will exercise it like a muscle. By doing it consistently, you build it stronger and stronger. It's why I like to do divination consistently, because that keeps my psychic muscle intact. It's why I like to do cleansing and purification regularly in my system, because I feel like it's like a psychic shower. It's like good hygiene on a witchcraft level. So I would say that too, doing good, healthy psychic hygiene, like deep cleansing things for yourself when you feel overwhelmed or overstimulated, even if that may not have a reason to it, being able to just, pour some Epsom salt and some water over your head, so you've got that cooling sense of like, no, I got this. Because your power is your biggest asset.
You are such a priest of the craft. I could listen to you talk all night, honey. I live for it. I live for it. And I've loved you from the moment I met you.
Thank you.
And you are such a good priest of the craft, because when you answer these questions, I'm listening to you and I'm just like, yes, yes, yes.
I hope that the madness carries out. I hope people value it, but also know, I want to say this too, when a lot of times, like, why I write and why I like to come on and make videos is because it actively is something that keeps me thinking about my practice as well. Like, I learn just as much from doing these because it keeps me thinking, it keeps me processing about things. So it's super, super value. And it's a huge source too of me feeling like I am in service, to what I said I was in service to. So in some ways, it's like, this is also like for the spirits. This is also like for the gods, because they enjoy people. They're very invested in people. The gods I work with certainly are. My gods are certainly, they're not friendly, but they're interested in humanity.
And blessed be.
And blessed be to that.
And so mote it be. And so where can people connect with you.
For
Like,
sure.
I have your links down below, but do a
Definitely.
little self promo and tell them where they can find you.
Y'all, you guys can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me, that's all on my link tree. You can also find me right here on YouTube. You can also find me on Facebook. If you guys are still on Facebook, I still am on Facebook. I think it's definitely changing. So I'm noticing my social media swinging more in the Blue Sky direction, is what I'm going to say. You can also find me on Crosscrow's website. And I'm also, because of all the crazy social media stuff, going back to email has been kind of exciting. So my email, for those of you, if you guys need it, is also attached to that LinkedIn. Oh, and you're looking at me like, and you're going to talk about the book, right? And if you go to Crosscrow Books, you can go ahead and purchase my book that I wrote, Awakening the Witchblood, Embodying the Art Magical, which gets into all of my favorite sort of techniques, skills, and histories of what exactly does it mean to be a witch, and what exactly does it mean to embody witch blood.
And the book is amazing. It has my full stamp of approval. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I tell all of our initiates to read it here locally because, like, the book is booking, babe. It really
Books
is.
are booking. And your book is booking. You just came out with a book. The latest in your set, right?
Yeah, I did.
I feel like that just came out.
Yeah.
And to answer Jasper's question real quick, do you suggest Potter fields or actual graveyards with headstones? Both. I would go to both, but I would start with the Potter's Field because that is where you're more likely going to get people who were marginalized and oppressed. Bring a pendulum with you and see if anyone reaches out. That's what I would do.
Well, I feel like we should make this more of a thing. Like,
I like an idea of doing a weekly or monthly tradcraft
yeah,
specific.
I could probably do like monthly.
Monthly.
Realistically, I can't do weekly, but like a monthly,
monthly, I'm
I'd
like,
be down.
yeah.
No,
and then
comment down below, y'all, if you want us to talk about trad witchery on the monthly.
And
Comment down below.
Like, what subjects do people want to know about tradcraft? Like, because it's so much. Like, we could talk about wart cunning, and we can talk about spirit conjuration, and we can talk about more about witch fight, and we can talk about the gods and the not gods. Let's talk about the not gods. I like the spirits.
Jasper says more. Yes, more.
More, yes. Oh, yay. I hope it makes sense. I hope it translates in the cyber world out there.
Maybe we should make like a podcast brand or something. We'll have to talk about it like off air. I do want to wrap this up because we are over the hour mark.
It's time to go.
But Nathan, thank you so much for coming on. And when I end this stream, you and I will be here privately, off air. If you want to have like a private kiki, because there's definitely stuff that we got to talk about off air.
Let's do it.
And yeah. Okay, so to wrap up, thank you all so much for coming. And until next time, blessed be, and I will see you in hell. Bye.
Bye.